The beautiful part about being a psychiatric nurse practitioner is our ability to work in so many different settings. We're not necessarily stuck to a certain setting like many other practitioners are. We're able to work inpatient, outpatient, crisis stabilization, urgent care. We're able to work in so many different places, but in this video I wanted to go over why I truly believe working outpatient is probably best for you, so stay tuned. Welcome back to another episode of LifeofaPsychNP. If you are new to my channel, let me formally introduce myself. I'm Darty. I'm a board-certified psychiatric nurse practitioner, and in this channel, I go over several different subjects to educate the public about mental health, ways to improve your lifestyle, topics related to nursing, nurse practitioners, and specifically psychiatric nurse practitioners like myself. So if you are interested in any of these topics, make sure you feel free to subscribe. Make sure you like this video because it helps me out so much and it helps keep me motivated. So make sure you like it and follow me on Instagram at LifeofaPsychNP. So you probably clicked this video because you're interested in finding out why I truly believe working in outpatient private practice is the best opportunity as a nurse practitioner, specifically a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And there's so many different reasons why I believe so, but I kind of narrowed it down to 5 reasons. Yes, you can work in so many different settings. I'm not going to say these are all of the best reasons, but what I wanted to bring or shed light on is the fact that this is beneficial for a certain amount of people. It's not beneficial for everyone, but for the most part, the majority of people are going to benefit from working in the outpatient private practice. And I started out in outpatient private practice, and then I kind of moved towards telepsychiatry, and I moved towards the urgent care crisis stabilization unit. So I have a good understanding of those different settings, and I still truly believe that, especially as a new grad, I would gravitate towards outpatient. I do want to see how it is on the inpatient setting, but for the most part, the outpatient setting kind of has my heart. And in this video, I'm going to go over these reasons. And I truly believe that you need to make sure that you stay until the very end of this video, because I'm going to be giving you my main reason on why I truly believe that outpatient private practice is the best setting, especially for new grads, maybe even towards the end of your career as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and it's going to kind of round it all out. So definitely stay until the very end. So without further ado, let's go over my 5 reasons why you should work in outpatient private practice. So my very first reason why you should work in outpatient private practice is you get to build long relationships with patients. So the beauty about being in outpatient private practice is you get to follow up with them quite often. You can either do it bi-weekly, you can either do it weekly, you can either do it every month, every 2 months, but the basis of this is that you're able to see your patients long term. And it's not like inpatient where you kind of just see them and they go out, or urgent care where you just see them once and don't necessarily are able to follow up with them. But with this sense, you're able to build a lifelong relationship. Maybe not your entire life, but at the same time, maybe their entire life, especially if you're following them from their adolescence years to maybe their adult years. But you're able to build this relationship and you're able to see how well they do throughout their career. And that's the amazing part, is just being able to follow them throughout their career. I've only been in it for 3 years, but at the same time, in this 3 years, just from my very first patient when I first started to now, just seeing their progress, seeing how their lives change, and you're able to see all of these things in an outpatient setting. If this doesn't really matter to you, then maybe you can just move on to the next reason. But for the most part, you're able to see this. You're able to see how these people are doing, how their families are doing, and just kind of following them along and building that rapport and building relationships to a point where you're comfortable with them. They're comfortable with you to be able to give them the best care possible. So the second reason why you should work outpatient private practice is the fact that they are lower acuity. So this is important, especially when it comes to new grads. You want to make sure that you're in a setting where you can learn. Yes, it might make sense to work in a higher acuity setting and then kind of just ramp down from there. But at the same time, depending on the person, if they have lower acuity patients, they can build up stamina. They can build up their confidence in being able to take care of these patients. And that's the beauty of it, is you're able to do that. And in inpatient settings, when you're comparing the acuity, they're really highly or higher acuity because they're suicidal, they maybe have more comorbidities, things like that. But in outpatient private practice, you're gonna start off and ramp off with just certain like mood disorders, maybe depression, anxiety, maybe some psychosis, and then you can kind of ramp up there from your skill set. But the beauty of it, especially as new grad, is you're going to get your feet wet. You're going to be able to spend the time that you want to be able to talk to these patients. You're able to just diagnose the depression, diagnose the anxiety, diagnose the bipolar, and just kind of ramp up from there. And you're able to do this especially in outpatient private practice, and you're able to kind of just ramp up, and they're lower acuity, so you don't have to worry as much, especially about like suicide, especially when it comes to their plan, things like that. And you're going to be able to learn all of these things and kind of ramp up. Yes, it might not be for everyone. Like I mentioned, all of these reasons might not be for everyone, but at the same time, it might be perfect for a certain amount of people where they want lower acuity patients, and they can always refer to higher level care if their patients are too acute. So you can always ramp up and get more comfortable with seeing amount of patients and seeing like, okay, maybe I just want to see depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar, and then you can kind of ramp up to schizophrenia, and then you can kind of ramp up to treatment-resistant schizophrenia or depression, and kind of ramp up from there and just build up the confidence. And it's not going to be just all major one shot where you're dealing with high acute patients and not necessarily knowing what to do. So my third reason why you should work in outpatient private practice is the fact that you get to ramp up. I know I kind of mentioned this, especially in the second reason, but I wanted to make this an important point, is that you get to ramp up. And in outpatient private practice, you have the flexibility to kind of make your own schedule. You're able to kind of do things at your pace. Obviously, it's at the employer's discretion, but for the most part, especially when it comes to being new grad, you're able to kind of ramp up from there. So if you want to see patients every hour, you can see patients every hour. If you want to see patients every 30 minutes, you can see patients every 30 minutes. But the basis of what I'm trying to say is you're able to ramp up accordingly, especially as new grads, especially newer in your careers, or just in any setting. You can just kind of put your patients so you can ramp up, and you have that flexibility to do so. Yes, obviously it just depends on the setting or the employer, but for the most part, a lot of employers are okay with you ramping up and just getting your feet wet, you getting used to being able to see patients, and then kind of going from there. It's a little bit harder, especially with an inpatient or maybe in a community mental health when they're lacking providers. A lot of the times they're just going to throw so many patients at you all at once, and you just have to see them. And one time, especially as a new grad, I was thrown in a situation where I just had to see 20 patients my very first day as a new grad, and that was definitely tough. But usually in outpatient private practices, you're able to kind of just do it at your own pace and see the amount of patients that you are. Because I was thrown into two different settings. I don't know if you know, but I started multiple jobs at the same time. And one job, I was just thrown out there, started seeing patients from the very get-go, 20 patients. But another private practice job where I was at, I only saw 5 in the beginning, and then it kind of just ramped up from there. And it's beautiful because I had that flexibility to do so, and I was able to ramp up. And like I said, maybe people want to see fast or a lot of patients in the beginning just so they get used to the flow. But for the most part, especially when you want to be safe and you want to be able to provide the highest quality of care possible, you want to make sure that you can ramp up. And in outpatient private practice, you're able to ramp up, and you're able to kind of gauge what you feel comfortable with and what you don't feel comfortable with, and then just kind of go from there. So the fourth reason why you should work in outpatient private practice is flexibility in your schedule. So I kind of touched upon this in the last reason, which is kind of all building up to the main reason. But for the most part, you have flexibility in your schedule. Obviously, it's all due to your employer and they have the say in it, but at the same time you have flexibility to make sure that your employer kind of helps you out in that sense, and then you can kind of go from there and being less flexible or more flexible or whatever the case is. But the most part is you're able to be flexible in outpatient private practices. You're not really restrained to a certain amount of time you have to see them in, and there's such a little time to see them in, such as other settings. But in this patient setting, you're able to spend as much time as them as you want, or as little as time as you want, because there's different codes that you can use to be able to get different set of reimbursements based for each employer. If you may get hourly, maybe you just they might not make you see them for 2 hours, but for the same time is you're able to make this your flexible schedule. You're able to be flexible when making your schedule. If you want to see new intakes for every hour, you can do that. If you want to see new intakes every 30 minutes, you can do that. The beauty about being an outpatient private practice, obviously depending on your employer, is you're able to do these things. You're able to set amount of time for these patients and see them in that amount of time. If you're not flexible or you're not comfortable enough seeing new patients in 30 minutes, at least in outpatient private practices, you're able to do so. If you work inpatient, you might have to see a certain amount of patients within that 8-hour shift. If you have to see 15 in an 8-hour shift, you're going to be seeing patients relatively fast. But for example, in outpatient private practice, they set these schedules for you. So you can always tell your front desk, like, oh, maybe this patient needs 30 minutes instead of 15-minute follow-up, or this patient might need an hour follow-up instead of 30 minutes. And you're able to kind of make this flexible. Obviously, like I mentioned, always and always, it depends on your employer. But if you open up your own private practice, you get to say in what all of these things and the time frames that you want to. So it might make sense for you, especially when it comes to your sanity, to be able to work in outpatient setting, because you're able to have this flexibility. And that's the beautiful part about being an outpatient, is your flexible schedule, so you can always do all of these things and make sure that you're mentally there and you're able to help them and be able to provide them with the highest quality of care possible. So my fifth and final reason, and if you made it this far, the best reason why you should work in outpatient private practice is the fact that you get a great work-life balance. So this is extremely important, especially as nurse practitioners, especially as psychiatric nurse practitioners who work in the mental health field, is you need to be able to have this balance between your work life and your home life. And working in outpatient setting is you're able to have this good work-life balance. You're able to see patients, you have the flexibility in your schedule, you have the flexibility in how much time you want to see them, you have weekends off, you're not necessarily on call overnight, things like that. Is you're able to work the flexible schedule and make sure you have this balanced schedule. Yes, there are certain times, depending on the employer, where they might make you see a certain amount of patients in a day and then certain amount of patients in a certain time frame, but at the same time, you can let them know that you can make flexible adjustments to the schedule, and they're able to do that, unlike other facilities where it's like either their crisis stabilization unit. If there's 10 people in the unit and you need to do evals on all 10 people within a 6-hour time frame, you're going to be having to do all of those evaluations, or the next person that's coming on is going to be pretty upset because you need to be able to transfer them or discharge them. But in the outpatient setting, just because they are scheduled, you have that flexibility to be like, okay, this person needs this amount of time, this person doesn't need this much time, and you get to do those adjustments. And that's the beautiful part about being in outpatient psychiatry, is you're able to have this flexibility and in turn help your work-life balance, so you're not necessarily working as much or as hard all the time, and you're still able to not take the work home with you, especially when it comes to outpatient wise. And that's the beautiful part, is you're able to still have a work-life balance, and you're still able to have a life outside of work where you still spend time with your family on weekends or after hours, and not necessarily having to worry so much about what's going on at work. So it's definitely something to consider. I know all of these reasons might not pertain to you, it might not benefit you, but at the same time, majority of people working in outpatient settings can realize that this is good, this is the perfect schedule, especially as being providers. Not that many people, especially in different settings or different specialties, they might not have the opportunity like we do. So working in the outpatient setting is probably the best, especially when you have your own practice. If you have your own practice, then all of these things you can do set in place and not necessarily have to worry about what the employer says. You get to do it for yourself. You're able to set the patient schedule, how long you want to see them. Like for me, example, in my private practice, I see patients for every hour, regardless of evaluations, regardless of follow-ups, because I still want to be able to provide them with some supportive therapy and interpersonal therapy and be able to kind of just round out my whole type of care from both medication standpoint and therapy standpoint and combining the two. And I've had great response, and that's the beauty about having your own outpatient private practice. You're able to do all of these things. Yes, obviously when you start off, if you don't have your own practice, which I don't suggest as a new grad, but you can always let your employer know, like, okay, since you are scheduling the patients, do you mind if I see patients during this time frame in the beginning, or I need this time off in the beginning, things like that. And a lot of the times, just because they do have to set appointments and it's not just walk-in basis, they're able to help you out in that sense, and you can kind of just ramp up to it. So it's always something to think about, because in other settings you're not able to have this flexibility. You're not able to be allowed to do all of these things, because like I mentioned in my my latest example, if you have 10 patients that you have to see, all evals that would usually take an hour, and you have to see them in 6 hours, then you have to grind to be able to see them. But since they're not scheduled, then that's why you have to do that. But in outpatient, you are able to schedule them, and you can make sure that, okay, this is way too much, you might have to reschedule them later on. So, and you always have that flexibility. Well, I know I'm talking too much, and I just wanted to give you my point of view on this setting. And I'm glad that I started off in the outpatient setting, because this helped me ramp up so much faster compared to being an inpatient, where I'm kind of just, if you're working inpatient, I haven't worked inpatient, but based off of what other providers have told me, that they're kind of just see the acute patients, they kind of just stabilize them to a point and then discharge them to the outpatient provider, who then takes care of them throughout their whole life. But for the most part, their style of working compared to ours is way different. Like I said, they stabilized, and for us, it's kind of, we do the work where we have to stabilize them even further, where they're able to go back to work, they're able to go back to school and just live their normal life, and we have to stabilize them and treat them in order for them to be the best that they can be. And you're able to learn all of these things, especially in outpatient private practice, as opposed to inpatient or urgent care or crisis stabilization, where you don't necessarily know how they're doing afterwards. And it's amazing when you're able to see how well they've come, especially coming from where they didn't work. Maybe their children are being taken away from them, but now them working, having their kids back in their custody, things like that, and you're able to see all of that progress. And that's the reason why I love outpatient private practice so much, is because you get to see all of these things, and you get to actually see that what you're doing truly can make an impact in their care, and you're gonna see all of those things. Yeah. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. And if you haven't liked this video already, make sure you give this thumbs up and like this video, because it truly helps me out. And if you have any questions, concerns, feel free to comment down below, and I'll be more than welcome to answer those questions. But until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.